Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So this is the second lecture on homeostasis, and at the end of this lecture we will more explain the concept of feedback system, the types of feedback system, that is negative and positive feedback system, and then what is adaptive control and what is gain of control system, and the last objective is automaticity of the body. Maybe this is new for you, but the purpose of homeostasis, the purpose of all the systems in maintaining homeostasis is to maintain homeostasis is to provide, you can say, an environment in which the cells can function easily. So they don't need to call for everything. So everything is available for each cell in the external, in the internal environment of the body, and that is automaticity of the body. So there are two types of feedback system, and we define feedback system that the feedback system is such a loop in which a stimulus either in response to a stimulus a product is produced, and that product either decreases the magnitude of the stimulus or increases the magnitude of the stimulus. On the basis of that, if the end product it further reinforces the stimulus, we define that mechanism as positive feedback mechanism. If the end product of the process it reduces the stimulus of that process, then it reverses a change in a controlled condition, and we labeled it as negative feedback system. In the explanation of positive feedback system, as we defined that the product it further reinforces the initial change. Initial change means initial stimulus, and that either leads to death in some cases, or it is of advantage for the body. So more correctly, the positive feedback mechanism it leads to instability rather stability, and when this occurs it leads to death. And when it is of advantage for the body, like in case of childbirth, in case of generation of nerve signal, in case of blood clotting, it is useful for the body. So in the negative feedback system, there is initial stimulus, there is initial stimulus, and that stimulus, for example, in case of blood pressure regulation, this first example is about the blood pressure regulation. So the stimulus at first disrupts the homeostasis. When it disrupts the homeostasis, what it causes? It causes increase of blood pressure. It causes increase in blood pressure. When it causes increase in the blood pressure, what happens? That is sensed by receptors. As this is related to pressure, so these receptors are called baroreceptors, and these receptors are located in the walls of greater arteries, in the aorta and in the arch of aorta and in the carotid arteries and other larger arteries also, but more prominently they are present in the arch of aorta and in the carotid, near the carotid sinus. So they sense that change, that the blood pressure is more. What happens? The signals passes to brain. What happens? Two effects occurs. Number one, stimulation of parasympathetic system. And number two, inhibition of sympathetic system. Now, the stimulation of parasympathetic system, what it causes? It causes decrease in heart rate. It causes decrease in heart rate. While this inhibition of sympathetic stimulation, it produces two effects. Number one, it decreases force of contraction. Number two, it decreases constriction of blood vessels. So the blood vessels, what they cause? They become dilated. When they become dilated, what happens? The venous return decreases. When venous return decreases, that means cardiac output decreases. In the same manner, when force of contraction decreases, it also causes decrease in cardiac output. And what is cardiac output? The amount of blood pumped by the heart in 1 minute. And in 1 minute, the heart pumps 5 liters of blood. And what is stroke volume? It is the amount of blood that is pumped by the heart in one contraction or in one heartbeat. And it is called stroke volume. Cardiac output, it is basically calculated by multiplying stroke volume with heart rate. So when cardiac output decreases, the decrease in cardiac output, it leads to decrease in blood pressure. The opposite occurs when blood pressure is low. When blood pressure is low, what will happen? That will be sensed by the baroreceptors. The signals will pass to the vasomotor center in the brain, and vasomotor center is located in the medulla oblongata of the brain. In that vasomotor center, that message will be interpreted, and after interpretation, what will be the result? There will be more increase in sympathetic discharge. There will be more increase in the sympathetic discharge, or you can simply say the sympathetic system, it becomes activated. When it becomes activated, the signals, they passes through sympathetic nerves to the sinoatrial node and also to the ventricular muscle and other parts of the heart also, and also signals, they passes to the blood vessels, so that three effects are produced. Number one, there is increase in heart rate due to stimulation of sinoatrial node. There is increase in force of contraction due to activation of ventricular muscle. There is constriction of the arterioles. There is constriction of the arterioles and veins to increase total peripheral resistance and to increase venous return. So these four effects, they cause increase in the blood pressure. The second example of this negative feedback mechanism is of regulation of oxygen. How this cycle of oxygen delivery to the tissues and then CO2 expulsion from the body, it occurs. It occurs by a process of inspiration and expiration. So first is about the oxygen. At lung level, what happens? Oxygen binds with hemoglobin. At lungs level, it binds with the hemoglobin. And this binding of oxygen with the hemoglobin at lung level is called Bohr's effect. It is called Bohr's effect. Maybe you have studied in the respiratory system. So Bohr's effect, it occurs at two levels. Number one, at the level of lungs. Then after binding with hemoglobin, the oxygen, it moves through the circulatory system. The blood passes through tissue capillaries and then hemoglobin releases oxygen into the tissue fluid if O2 concentration in tissue fluid is low. If it is not low, the oxygen is not delivered. And this explains the local control of delivery of oxygen and nutrients to the cells. If a cell is working, more oxygen is delivered to those cells. Like I am talking, my muscles of tongue are being used. More oxygen, more nutrients, they are supplied to the tongue muscles and the muscles of larynx and pharynx, that helps in the speaking. In the same manner, as I am teaching and I am using each and every word in such a manner that each word, it relates with the next word. So my brain is working more as compared to you people. Because you are only listening and understanding. You are not speaking. So oxygen is delivered to the cells from the blood capillaries and that restores level of oxygen in the cells. And what is the use of oxygen? Oxygen is used in the oxidative processes. Yesterday, one of your classmates, she asked that some question about something. I don't remember that question. But the answer was that when we take up nutrients like carbohydrates, fats, and proteins in our diet, from the GIT they are absorbed. They are broken down into small constituent parts like carbohydrates into glucose and fats into fatty acids, then proteins into amino acids. And in this form, they are absorbed by the gastrointestinal tract and they move into the bloodstream. Then from the bloodstream, these cells are delivered to the cells. Before entering the outer mitochondrial membrane, the glucose, fatty acids, and amino acids, they are converted into a single molecule, that is acetyl coenzyme. Acetyl coenzyme. Then it enters the inner mitochondrial, through inner mitochondrial membrane into the center of mitochondria where enzymes of oxidative phosphorylation are present. And here is the main cycle that is called Krebs cycle or citric acid cycle is present. And acetyl CoA, so it is formed from pyruvate, and pyruvate is formed from lactate when oxygen is present. So this whole process, the breakdown of one glucose molecule, it yields some molecules of energy. But when it enters the citric acid cycle, if oxygen is available, it yields more than 34 moles of ATP. So the use of everything, the oxygen is nutrient. The carbohydrates, like proteins, like fats, all these things are nutrients and they are used by the body to produce one thing, that is molecule, energy molecule, that is adenosine triphosphate. So after use by the cells, what is produced? Carbon dioxide is produced. When carbon dioxide is produced, that simply means when the cells they use oxygen, that means as the use of oxygen increases, you can say the rate of production of carbon dioxide it also increases. So the amount of carbon dioxide is more in the cells as compared to the internal environment, that is extracellular fluid. So carbon dioxide it easily diffuses from the cells into the extracellular space. As the extracellular space now contains more carbon dioxide, so it easily diffuses. Diffusion means the transport of ions or molecules from higher to lower concentration gradient without the use of energy. So it diffuses from the extracellular space into the bloodstream. Now the level of carbon dioxide it becomes more in the blood vessels as compared to lung. It reaches the lungs where the level of carbon dioxide is less. So it diffuses from the bloodstream into the lung cavity. And from the lungs, through the process of expiration, it passes out. So basically, when oxygen level is less in the body, we inspire more. We inspire more deeply. We inspire more forcefully. So when the level of carbon dioxide increases, in the same manner we breathe rapidly and deeply. That restores balance by moving out carbon dioxide. And this was about the negative feedback mechanism. This was about the few examples of negative feedback mechanism. Like the regulation of endocrine hormones. It is through negative feedback mechanism. The regulation of endocrine hormones that are secreted by the endocrine glands, that is under the control of negative feedback system. Then what is positive feedback system? In positive feedback system, formed in the heart vessels. When these are formed, these leads to obstruction of blood flow. When they leads to obstruction of the blood flow, the heart muscle cannot get supply. Heart muscle. And this decreased supply to heart muscle, it leads to a disease that is called heart attack. That is called heart attack. जिसे हम क्या कहते हैं? मायोकार्डियल इन्फार्क्शन. Myocardial infarction. So this is how that blood clot formation is useful and blood clot formation is not useful for the body. When one unwanted blood clot is formed inside the blood vessels, that interrupts the flow of blood to the coronary muscle, to the heart muscle, through the coronary blood vessels. And that leads to the formation of other clots. Those clots may detach from the heart. In the heart chambers, the clot, especially in the right ventricle, the clots are formed. When they detach, they flow through the blood vessels and they can interrupt blood flow in any of the blood vessels. Usually, they obstruct the pulmonary blood vessels or the blood vessels of the brain. If they obstruct the pulmonary blood vessels, they leads to pulmonary embolism. That is again medical emergency. Whenever in your life a person is presented in emergency with sudden onset of breathlessness and his attendants or relatives, parents, brother or sister, they are not giving history of breathlessness before, that directly means something dangerous has happened. Immediately go for X-ray chest. If a person with heart disease, with hypertension, he loses power of one side of the body, that means he is suffering from hemiplegia, जिसे हम कॉमन जुबान में क्या कहते हैं, पाकिस्तान में फालिज कहते हैं. That simply occurs due to formation of some clot in the arteries of the brain. So this blood clot formation and its knowledge, its detail, the detail of platelet function is important for understanding the pathophysiological processes of diseases that are number one cause of death in the human beings. Then is the childbirth. As you all know, and you have studied this thing, there's the childbirth is positive feedback mechanism. It is positive feedback mechanism. In the 7th or 8th month of pregnancy, what happens? Weak uterine contractions, they start. And they start due to the movement of the baby. First they appear after 7 days, after 10 days. Then gradually, as the days passes, they become strong and they appear more early. When these contractions, they become strong enough, they push the head of the baby into the cervix. That produces stretch in the cervix. The uterine contractions pushes head of baby into cervix, that produces stretch. The signals passes to brain plus uterus. ब्रेन को क्यों जाते हैं? फॉर द रिलीज ऑफ ऑक्सीटोसिन, एंड टू द यूट्रस टू प्रोड्यूस मोर कॉन्ट्रैक्शंस. More contractions, more powerful, and that leads to delivery of the baby. The next example is generation of nerve signal, that is generation of action potential. What happens? The interior of the interior of the nerve fiber is negative as compared to outside, that is positive. The outside is positive means the extracellular fluid is positive because of more concentration of sodium ions, and inside is negative because of the presence of proteins, because they cannot leave the cell, because of the presence of proteins and less positive ions. So when the membrane of the nerve fiber, it is stimulated, when the membrane of the nerve fiber, it becomes stimulated or it is excited by the application of a stimulus, what happens? The positive charge, it moves inside. Now inside becomes positive and outside becomes negative. At this point, what it causes? The movement of one positive charge, one positive ion, it changes the inside of the membrane. Now the inside of the nerve fiber membrane, it becomes more positive. When it becomes more positive, it leads to opening of more voltage gated sodium channels. Then it causes activation of next channels. Then more positive ions will move inside. And in this way, there is explosion of sodium entry inside the nerve fiber. That ultimately increases positivity inside the nerve fiber to its peak. So the movement of sodium inside the nerve fiber is positive phenomena. And the positivity inside the nerve fiber, it becomes its peak. When it achieves its peak, that is the desired peak, then action potential is fired. When action potential is fired, when stimulus from one neuron, it passes to the next neuron, or it passes to the muscle, or it passes to the gland, it means the action potential is fired. So these are the examples of the positive feedback mechanism. Now, what is gain of a control system? Gain of a control system means that the degree of effectiveness, the gain of control system, it directly means that it is the degree of effectiveness with which a feedback system corrects change. It corrects change. I am giving two examples about the gain of a control system. Blood pressure regulation, we are talking about the blood pressure. And we have seen that there is a control system that senses change in the pressure, and that is baroreceptor system. Suppose it's not functional. It's not functional. When it is not functional, and we infuse blood, when we infuse blood, normal range of blood pressure is 100 millimeter of mercury, and this normal range is called mean arterial pressure. So the baroreceptors, they don't sense change in systolic pressure, they don't sense change in diastolic pressure, but they sense a change in the mean arterial pressure. They sense a change in mean arterial pressure, and mean arterial pressure we define as it is millisecond. It is the change in blood pressure that is observed by the baroreceptor system, by the vasomotor center, millisecond by millisecond over a period of cardiac cycle. So this mean arterial pressure, basically it is product of diastolic pressure plus 1/3 pulse pressure. Pulse pressure means heart rate, that we calculate by placing our fingers on the radial artery or on the brachial artery and other arteries of the body. So suppose the baroreceptor system is not functional and we infuse blood. What will happen? Blood pressure increases from 100 to 175 millimeter of mercury. So how much is the change? Change is 75. Change is 75. Now suppose baroreceptors are functional and we infuse same amount of blood. Blood pressure will now increase from 100 to 125 millimeter of mercury. How much is the change? Change is 25. Change is 25. So the negative feedback system, it produces 1/3 correction. So it produces 1/3. And what is deficit? इस system में when the baroreceptors are not functional, how much is the deficit? The deficit is 50 millimeter of mercury. And how much is corrected? It is 25. And it is calculated by a formula that is gain is equal to correction over, और इसे किससे डिवाइड करेंगे 50/25 और your result is -2. So this simply explains that feedback system it never produces never produces 100% correction. So the correction is always 1/3. So the question of the students that met me in my office was that if feedback system is active, negative feedback system is active, how we develop blood pressure? The meaning of their question was that by the use of salt, like everybody among you is fond of eating chips that contains bulk of salt. So you start eating more salt, what happens? There is desire for water. What happens? Your extracellular volume increases. And according to that, your body compensates and people urinate more. When you urinate more, there is more elimination of salt and water from the body. And the extracellular fluid is again balanced. But over a period of time, when we are used to it and we are using salt more and more, what will happen? Very slowly, your blood pressure, it starts increasing. And finally, as we discussed yesterday, that it deviates from the normal range. And the blood pressure mechanisms, they fails to correct the change, as they cannot correct the change 100%. So very minor increase in disturbance starts adding up. That ultimately leads to hypertension. And this is the number one cause of hypertension in our society. Because we are too much scorers. Along with shokas. There is a difference between your class and your senior class. People are saying you people are badtameez, but you people are not badtameez. What I have observed, they were also brilliant. They were genius. But I don't like that class. They are not allowed to say salam to me because of these characteristics. They are not caring for themselves, not caring for their teachers, for their studies. They are using for their abilities for some other purposes. But I have found decency and obedience in your class along with intelligence. And that is more better feedback loop in you people. Then adaptive control. Now this term is included by Professor Hall in the guidance physiology, and I don't agree with that this term is to be introduced to the new medical students. What is adaptive controls? Sometimes movements occur so rapidly and there is not enough time for the signals to reach from peripheral parts of the body to the brain, and then from the brain to the back again to the peripheral parts of the body to correct movements. And this concept leads to the term, what is? Adaptive control. Basically, it is feed forward control. It is feed forward control. And it explains that the signals passes from moving parts to the brain directly to correct errors in activity. To correct errors in activity. This is not so simple. The movement is initiated by the motor cortex that is present in the cerebrum. From the cerebrum, the motor tracks, they descend downward. They passes through vertebral column, that is called through spinal cord, that is present in the vertebral column. Then they supply each and every part of the limbs, trunk and lower limbs. And they control the movements. When a signal for movement is initiated, it is initiated by the brain. It is initiated by the motor cortex. Then according to desire of the motor cortex, the desired movement occurs. Where movement is occurring, from that movement, from that receptor, from that area, the signals passes through another track directly to the cerebellum. Then cerebellum, it is the cerebellum that basically decides that the movement that is occurring at the peripheral point is according to the plan of the motor cortex that the motor cortex desired. If it is so, no correction is needed. If it is not according to the plan that is given by the motor cortex, according to the image that is formed in the motor cortex, in the motor areas of the brain, if it is not according to that, then cerebellum sends error signals. It sends error signals. Like when we start driving, first time, we drive like and cycle, our motorcycle, our car, it moves sometimes to the left, sometimes to the right, and then with further attempts, what happens then? We ultimately, with repeated effort, we start moving on a straight line. And this is feed forward control system. And this is called adaptive control. Basically, you can say it is the predictive function of certain receptors in our body, especially in the vestibular apparatus, that predict before time that you are going to the physiology lab. You start moving out of the lecture theatre. You are moving and suddenly there is a turn. Have you ever think of turn on the third or fourth day? On the first day, you were like that whether this turn leads to the physiology department or to the physiology lab or in the physiology corridor, like the physiology lab is located on the left side or on the right side. On the first day, all of you thought about this. But on the next day, what happened? You suddenly you turn to the left. On the next day, आपने ये भी नहीं सोचा और आप यूं करके बातें भी किए, यू आर टॉकिंग, यू आर मूविंग एंड यू सडनली एंटर्ड इनटू द लैब. This is the feed forward control system of the body. In today's lecture, that is automaticity of the body. Automaticity means that the cells contributes to maintain homeostasis. Cells, organs, systems contribute to maintain homeostasis. When homeostasis is maintained, other cells get benefit. When they get benefit, they adds up, cell add up their contribution to homeostasis, and other cells get benefit, and in this way they maintain homeostasis, and this concept is called automaticity. And the bad point about the automaticity is that in this manner the cells, they remain in function throughout the life, and ultimately as the cells are designed to perform a function for a specific period, are defined to perform function for a specific period, and during the course of normal age process, that the function of the cell starts declining. It starts declining. When it starts declining, the cells, certain cells, they add up their input to the homeostasis, and ultimately these mechanisms, they fail. The cellular function, it fails, and a person dies. This is the end of this homeostasis. That we are designed for normal function. We are not designed for abnormal function. So, with the end of this chapter, now you should be like that you are becoming doctors, and being doctors, you must add something positive to the society, not negative to the society. So always be positive and think both sides, negative side and positive side of certain feature, but always take a positive part, not a negative part. With this, we are finishing this lecture, and in the next lecture, from the next lectures, either we will start cell membrane and membrane transport, or we will discuss the clinical scenarios related to this.